This episode is brought to you by the European Coworking Assembly. We are everything Coworking Europe. If you head to the Coworking Assembly website, you can connect with our World Coworking, European Freelancers Week, Coworking Symposium, Coworking Library, and Coworking Tools.
Hello, folks, and welcome to this special series of the Co-working Values podcast. And this is, I'm going to call it the complement to the Co-working Idea Book, which is a handbook for inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility that's been put together by lots of people in the co-working universe. And to help me along the way there, in fact, to just make sure I get there, is Tash, which a lot of you know. But Tash, do you want to say what you're known for and what you'd like to be known for?
What I'd like to be known for, saving the world. No, joking. What am I known for? I am a diversity, equity and inclusion consultant. So I specialise in helping to design and deliver training across a broad range of companies, charities, etc. My particular passions, I would say, are LGBTQ, allyship and awareness, identity is a really big thing for me. And also, I guess, action points, like positive, actionable things that you can do to kind of just make the world a better place and be a better human.
Love it. That's so we're going to put lots of links in the show notes here, and this is the complement to the book. So this isn't the the everything you'll ever need to work out your diversity and inclusion. And there's a lot of things that, as I've learned more about this over the years and read and just everything, that I had questions along the way. So one of the first things I want to ask is something along the lines, Tash, of what is diversity and inclusion and what isn't it in a kind of industry setting, because that is a very even though it's a very popular word, it's kind of misunderstood, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll probably start with what it isn't to begin with. It's not a tick box exercise. A little bit of I think that should be a bumper sticker by now. But I think a lot of people see it as this sort of thing that's like a training that has to be done, and it's just part of fulfilling a certain quota or having to reach certain targets. And it's not that at all. Obviously, yes, there are certain aspects where people have aspirations to achieve a certain, makeup of their company or membership, whatever that is. But that's not the crux of diversity and inclusion at all, by any means. I will also say that I think everybody has a different understanding or interpretation of what it is, and everybody certainly in my field of work. But for me personally, I think, diversity is around acknowledging the difference that we are, and difference is a fact of life. We all have differences in our identities, our experience, our cultures, our personal perspectives of things. And inclusion is about, allowing space for those differences. It's about acknowledging that actually those differences can often enhance the communities that we're in, the workspaces that we're in, the groups that we're a part of by having that. And I guess then when you translate that to a more formal and structured setting, i.e. diversity and inclusion within business, it's about, okay, what do we do as a company? What do we do as a co-working space, as a community, to ensure that we welcome that difference and we support it in whatever way we can?
So what is the other word that comes up along here a lot is the term lived experience. And that took... Well, I never disagreed with it. It took me a long time to understand what that really meant. Because that gets thrown around a lot in online and in books and stuff. So what does that term mean? Because I think that's a gateway to a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely understanding people's lived experience, i.e. the things that you have gone through in life, right? The aspects of your everyday experience, your lifetime experience that gives you the perspective that you have, whether that's negative or positive. And quite often when we're talking about, trying to support, I'd like to say oh my gosh, brain just disappeared on me there. No, not even underrepresented, underestimated groups, right? So when we're trying to support underestimated groups, quite often we need to understand the challenges of that lived experience, right? And when we can understand the challenges, but also the privileges of our own potential lived experience, I think that's the way that we can better support people. So for me, I can sit here and on paper, I can say that, I am a queer woman of color. So therefore that gives a very specific lived experience versus if I was a Black heterosexual male, right? We have very different experiences in life. Within my own identities, though, I have privilege. I am cisgendered. I identify with the sex that I was assigned at birth. However, and I also speak English, that's my first language. It provides me with a lot of privilege, even as I travel the world. But my lived experience as a woman means that I'm aware of certain barriers, certain challenges based off of my sex. So lived experiences, it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative or positive. I think that definitely through media, we associate the term lived experience with a negative thing, always, and quite often a lot of the terms within diversity and inclusion get sort of tarred with a positive or negative. When we talk about privilege, it's always seen as a negative. When we talk about, like lived experience, it's always seen that it must have been challenges. But actually, diversity, we think that it's only about race, right? And actually, there is so much more depth to each of these terms.
That's great. I think that the way you explain that is really important, because it is often like this or this.
Yeah.
And as a straight white male that went to public school, I have my own lived experience. Tash, navigating London is interesting. There's one of the things that I've said this to you before in other podcasts is there's a guy that runs a co-working space in Hackney, and in the middle of 2020, not that long after George Floyd's murder in the States, we were talking about this, and he said, "I think diversity is just a storm in a teacup." And I was left speechless. And I've often been like reflecting on that. And I think it was the way that this week I think it was the way it was. I don't agree with him at all, obviously, but just in case the listeners misunderstood that. But he just, I don't even want to say he didn't get it. It was just he didn't make the connection. And I'm going to a co-working context between his co-working space and the conversations we're having in the co-working idea project and everything in the wider thing. And is there something, the way people like you and me represent, the point of this diversity and inclusion book and the whole conversation, because it is so complex and so important at the same time?
Yeah, I think that probably one of the things that I have definitely learned along the way, just through the work that I do and being in training sessions and delivering to real people who are on varying different points of what is a forever journey, right? Diversity and inclusion, it's not like you go and do an unconscious bias course and all of a sudden you're, in quoted, fixed, or you're no longer biased. Like, that's impossible. It's forever learning and it's forever having conversations. And one of the things that I really see is that, everybody is on a different part of that journey based off of their lived experience, right? We all have different interpretations of what the topic means to us, how it impacts us. And for a lot of people, they feel like it is a case of, I have this, and in order for somebody else to have the equal opportunity to me, it means I have to lose. I have to give up something, or I lose out on something, right? And actually, it's about having the conversation and creating space for everybody. We live in a world and societies that have systemic bias built into them, because these were not conversations that were being had 100 years ago, right? When we were developing our parliaments, when we were developing our policies and procedures generally. And they were being developed by a core demographic of people who, of course, developed them to suit themselves. And, that's human instinct. We can't deny that. Yes, there is a lot of other stuff around that, but if we take it in its simplest form. And so I think that now the conversation, for a lot of people, the conversation can be quite confronting, but I also think it's the way that it's delivered in a lot of times. So we see people saying, you can't say that, don't say that. We see the media giving us big buzzwords and big scary things and creating this division and in having the conversations in a really polarizing way, and actually turning around to somebody and saying, you can't say that. it's not helpful, right? It's about saying, you know, I just want to understand, why do you think that that's okay? Or, you know, can I understand what you mean by that comment? Let's have a conversation as to why you feel that this is correct versus this. What is your lived experience that's led you to that conclusion versus my lived experience? And for me, diversity and inclusion as a topic is about having conversations and creating space to have that. Obviously, there are action points along there. You know, if you have a space that's not accessible, doesn't have a ramp, doesn't have a disabled toilet, there are tangible things that maybe need to be done. But in the wider frame, I think it's more about creating safe but also brave spaces to be able to explore, to understand each other.
The other one I want to ask you about is frequently I read companies with a very diverse staff force just do well. Is that accurate?
Can you reframe the question?
So,
as in, like, people, as in, I understand. So, like, companies that have that diversity within their workforce generally tend to be doing better from like a business standpoint.
What better is a bit subjective, but
yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I would like that to be true. And in your experience and research, you know, is that just something thrown out by enthusiasts like you and me, or is it actually true?
No, it is statistically true. So, you know, when we think about companies or businesses that are catering to especially a public audience, which is pretty much everyone, you know, you want to be able to put your minds and be in the mind of your consumer, right? And that involves, you know, so many blind spots that we have naturally just because of our own life experience, right? And the people that we communicate with. And it, you know, it has been proven. There is the McKinsey 2020 showed that companies in the top quartile for gender and ethnic diversity on an executive team are more likely to achieve above average profitability than companies in the fourth quartile. So plus 25% by gender diversity, plus 36% by ethnic diversity. So it's like we see tangible differences. Cognitive diversity can enhance a team's innovation by up to 20%. Because you have different ideas based on different lived experience, right? Rather than one collection, all sort of like we all went to the same school, we all grew up in roughly the same area. So we all came up against the exact same problems. And now we're having to think for a much broader audience. You think of, in the simplest form, you know, maternity and paternity leave in workplaces for a very long time has been maternity and paternity leave, with the assumption that we all are in heterosexual relationships where the male of the relationship wants to go and work long hours and the woman wants to stay at home. And that's just not true to life anymore, right? We have single parent families, we have same-sex parents, we have, you know, actually the reverse, where we have fathers that want to stay at home and mothers that want to be the CEO of companies, right? So when we have that diversity within our team, we have lots of different people saying, actually, this policy doesn't suit me because that's not how my family is made up. That's not my experience. And so, yes, in simplest terms, there is definitely hard data to show that when you have that diversity in your team, in your structures, in your community, it benefits not just you on a business level, but also on a social level, the people that are working together.
So we'll get a little bit to what's in the book in a minute, but what is the, you know, as you've been putting this together with the other folks, you know, why, if someone was to say, gee, Tash, why this book now? Or that kind of question, you know, why do we need a handbook?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, okay, it's a good question. I think just because of, you know, everybody who's in co-working or is associated with co-working or has come into contact with it understands that it's kind of, in its purest sense of how we understand co-working, it's kind of this sort of unusual setup that sits outside of the everyday corporate company structure, right? We have these spaces where often they're community led. There's not necessarily one person in charge. They may be a cooperative. It's all these different moving parts that aren't the standard structure of having a HR department, a people team, you know, a legal department and all these other things. Yet they are spaces that can easily be the catalyst for creating amazing community hubs. And so I was realizing that, as a team, we were also realizing that there were these challenges that within the co-working community in particular, that when it came to diversity and inclusion, like, how do we make this relevant to us? Okay, we don't have a HR department. We don't have the same policies that a standard organization would have, but we still have some of the same problems and challenges. So it was about kind of doing the homework for everyone in creating a bit more of a guide and a tool of, okay, we take all of these concepts, all of these things that we understand within what is IDEA, and how do we shift and kind of change them and put them in the context of co-working to help support what is often communities that don't necessarily have the resources to have a dedicated D&I officer. So to be that support and resource for those communities in particular, especially, but actually being a support for everybody.
Yeah, I've been in and around co-working for at least 3,000 years now. And when I've helped run spaces, like at no point, I remember like where you and I met in Euston in 2015 or whatever it was, and I ran that place with Phil. There are so many things that we knew were important and we wanted to do, and we read books about them, and then putting them to action between emptying the dishwasher, cleaning the toilet, fixing the lock on the door, welcoming, cleaning up the meeting room, recording podcasts and everything. Like there's a list of things that probably demands a bit more thinking, because it's which is why we've written a book about it to do. So I've never met anyone that's like deliberately anti-diversity and inclusion, apart from one guy who ran a company who I can't say for legal reasons. But it's very I can't even say it. It's just hard to get around to it, how to implement it in what you're doing. And this handbook and the co-working idea project that runs every month is your kind of diversity and inclusion community. That's and something you said earlier, like it's a never-ending journey. There's always
absolutely
more to understand. Things happen in the world, and then I think there's a group of people. I remember back in probably like 2015 in Co-working Europe in Italy, there was I wandered into a session run by Ashley, which was about diversity and inclusion in co-working, and there was like 6 people there. And I think there were more people going to how to fry eggs on the blockchain session than there were the diversity and inclusion thing, because it just wasn't something, partly because it's a very new industry.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to chuck in there, and I hope I don't misquote you, Iris, is in Women Who Co-work, they have this, one of their values or missions is that this is the co-working flex space, whatever you want to call it, industry is so new. And it's such a collaborative collection of people working in business and running their own things. There's a massive opportunity for it to be the first industry that is just built from diversity, built from the ground up on diversity and inclusion. So it's not an exception. It's just what happens.
And I totally get it. It's like how it should run, full stop. Right? It's not this add-on that we do for everywhere else.
Yeah, and this, like 2021, started to feel like finally it wasn't an add-on.
Mm-hmm.
There were things like, we did the Co-working Europe. There was the panel, which was, we will put a link in the show notes to that podcast, which was the last time I spoke to John Eves, that was the 3rd most listened to recording in the Co-working Europe online hub, whatever you want to call it. And the first 2, everyone always listens to James Rankin and his data from Instant Office, and everyone always listens to Carsten and the Desk Mag global co-working survey. So to be 3rd is pretty cool. So what can I expect from that? No, that's not. That sounds like an evaluation, doesn't it, Tash? So what can people expect from the book, Tash, and to find in there, and how would you like them to navigate it?
Yeah, so I think what they can actually find is a roadmap, right? This as a topic, especially when you've articulated all the different responsibilities and expectations within running a co-working space, and even being a member of a co-working space, is sometimes you just don't know where to start. This is a topic, feels huge. It's so big to get your arms around, and actually it can feel overwhelming, especially if this isn't your passion like it is for me. So first and foremost, it's a roadmap. It's a guide of outlining, okay, these are the basics. And if you can put these things in place, you're already in a good space. But let's do it properly. So how do you audit your space? What are the things that you're looking for? What are the things to consider when we are talking about D&I? As I said, when people, for a very long time, when people thought about diversity and inclusion, it was about race and gender, and that was it. And maybe a hint of accessibility. And actually, the conversation is much more nuanced than that. It's much deeper than that. So this is kind of that guiding map and sort of that holding hand to get you like off the starting blocks and a bit further, with then a ton of resources that can help support that. And also it's that connection point. So you can then be in contact with, you know, myself and lots of other experts within the field that can maybe support you on very specific things. But the handbook in itself is that tool to help you get started and know, you know, where are the gaps? Where can we do better? Or where do I begin?
I'm just so excited listening to that. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I was tempted to launch into 10 more questions there. What we're going to do is Tash and I, we have this series here. We're both interviewing 4 people each on specific subjects that are probably close to our heart on this whole topic, and then we'll come back for a final episode. In the meantime, you can go to the not the London Coworking Assembly. You will find stuff about it on the London Coworking Assembly. You can go to the European Coworking Assembly website, which is coworkingassembly.eu, and there's a page there where you can, depending on when you listen to this, either sign up to receive an email when the pre-order is available, or to just pre-order the book. And the more people we get to pre-order the book, the better. Obviously, if you ever sold a book, that is what we're looking for here. There's can you say a little bit about different formats and how people can get to it? Because you know we're all learning. I never read a book, but I listen to like 3 audio books a week. So if you give me a book, I'm never going to read it. So you know that kind of thing we're looking to.
Yeah, so we have obviously a digital version that you can, you know, download. You can order a hard copy, so a physical book that you can turn pages. And actually, probably most inspired by you, Bernie, is that we will also have an audio book version, because we know that that's probably the only way we'll get you to fully read all of it. Yeah. So we also have an audio book that will come out either at the same time or literally sort of a week to 2 weeks after the physical downloadable copy.
Ace. So where can we find you, Tash?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Tash Thomas on LinkedIn. Or you can also find me on Instagram on there, and I do a lot of work through there, which is tasht.uk. If you want something that's specific LGBTQ allyship and awareness, my wife and I also have a platform on Instagram, which is Breaking the Distance, as well as a blog and a podcast that are both Breaking the Distance on respective platforms that you can hear a lot more about, you know, LGBTQ awareness and allyship through that as well.
Ace, thank you for your constant energy here in my life and in this work, Tash. Folks, don't forget, go to coworkingassembly.eu. Be careful out there. It is a jungle. Thanks for your time and attention.